It's a strange thing, hearing your own death being planned. It's even stranger when the architects are your mother and brother. But the absolute worst part? Being paralyzed and unable to move a single muscle. Knowing that the only thing separating you from the dark is the beep of a machine. I was 35 years old, lying in an intensive care unit bed, when I realized my life had been reduced to a financial ledger. My own family, my mother, Beatrice Hendricks, and my older brother, Tyler Hendricks, were fighting over my life insurance policy while I was still breathing. If you've ever had to cut a toxic person out of your life, if you've ever looked at a relative and seen a stranger, then you know this pain. If you're with me right now, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because I guarantee you need to hear this story. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now, because if you stick with me, I'm going to show you how I fought back from absolute zero, how I found the strength to rebuild my life, and most importantly, how I got sweet, clean justice against the people who tried to murder me for money. The fluorescent lights of the ICU ward felt less like light and more like surgical instruments stabbing directly into my brain. But I couldn't flinch. I was a mechanic, Jesse Hendricks, the owner of Hendricks's Garage in Maple Creek, Indiana. I worked with my hands every single day. Now, my hands were useless. They were strapped down, tubes running into my arms, while a ventilator pushed air in and out of my lungs with a mechanical, predictable sigh. The doctors called it a massive cardiac event. I called it the end of my life, until the voices started. I was in a state the nurses kept calling minimal consciousness, but I could hear everything. The beeps, the muffled announcements, and then the footsteps. My mother's familiar, heavy sigh was the first sound. It wasn't a sigh of grief. It was the sigh of impatience. "Well, Dorothy," she said, using her middle name, the one she used when she felt important. "We need to discuss practicalities. The shop is worth almost as much as the policy now. We need to decide who manages the liquidation." My blood ran cold, or at least what was left of it in my veins. Liquidation? They thought I was gone. Then came Tyler, my older brother, smelling faintly of cheap cologne in desperation. The insurance company is already asking questions about the timeline. I spoke to the agent. They said if he doesn't recover within the next 48 hours, they move into the full payout phase. It's $500,000, Mother. We need to focus. The number echoed in the sterile room. $500,000. That was my value. That was the price of my life. Broken down between a mother with an escalating online gambling addiction and a brother whose real estate career was a crumbling facade of leased BMWs and empty promises. I tried to scream. I tried to lift a finger, to cough, to signal that I was right there. I strained every single nerve. But my body was concrete. I was trapped inside my own skull, screaming silent, futile curses. Beatrice, Mother, actually shushed Tyler. "Keep your voice down. Stan is still out there somewhere, and we need to get the paperwork ready. We'll tell Chloe we split it 3 ways, after the debts are cleared. But frankly, I need the largest share to stabilize the bank accounts." Then came the moment that changed everything. The moment that took my heart, which was already failing, and shattered it completely. Tyler leaned close, his voice dropping to a horrifying, calculating whisper, a tone he usually reserved for closing a difficult sale. I heard him address the intern doctor who was checking my monitors. "Look, the insurance is valid either way. He's never coming back. We should just let him go. He's going to flatline anyway. Why waste the hospital's resources? Why put the family through this?" He was actively urging a medical professional to essentially abandon my care. That whisper, that cold, self-serving, heartless demand, was the truest expression of betrayal I had ever known. I was paralyzed in the ICU, But that sound was the only thing that kept me fighting. I didn't want to live for myself anymore. I wanted to live for justice. I wanted to live so I could watch their faces when they realized I had heard them plotting my murder. I strained again, this time with a new, blinding focus. Survive. Remember. Fight. The machine beeped, loud and constant. My whole world was agony and the sound of my family dividing up my future. This wasn't a natural cardiac event. It was a crime, and I was the only witness. You want to know why someone would rather see their own son flatline than watch him recover? You need to look at the roots. The poison that nearly killed me didn't start with a cardiac glycoside. It started decades ago, planted deep in the cracked foundation of my childhood home by my own mother's insatiable greed. Lying there, paralyzed, listening to Beatrice and Tyler turn my life into an asset sheet. I had nothing but time to replay every single memory. And it all clicked. It wasn't just about my life insurance, it was about status, envy, and debt. The Hendricks family wasn't poor. My dad, Stan Hendricks, worked his butt off his entire life as an honest plumber. We always had food, a mortgage paid on time, and a car that ran. But for my mother, Beatrice, that was never enough. We were always performing for the neighbors. We were the suburban family that looked successful, even if we were always one broken washing machine away from disaster. Beatrice was obsessed with appearances. She was the kind of person who would criticize your worn-out shoes while simultaneously checking your pockets for cash. This obsession created the golden child, my brother, Tyler. Tyler was 3 years older, charming, and utterly useless when it came to real work. But in Beatrice's eyes, he was the prodigy. He was the one who was supposed to make the family rich. He went to a state college, got a degree in finance, and came back convinced he was the next Gordon Gekko. The truth? Tyler couldn't sell a glass of water in the desert. His career was a revolving door of bad business ideas, day trading, pyramid schemes, and finally, chasing real estate commissions in a market he didn't understand. But try telling Beatrice that. She just kept funneling money into his ventures. Tyler is building an empire, she'd tell the neighbors at Sunday barbecue. Even as Tyler was silently defaulting on his student loans, I was the opposite. I was Jesse Hendricks, the one who got dirty. I didn't want college. I wanted to fix things. When Grandpa passed away, I took over his tiny, honest Hendricks garage in Maple Creek. I took pride in fixing people's problems without ripping them off. I was the responsible one, the stable one. But to Beatrice, I was just a mechanic, a necessary embarrassment. Jessie is so practical, she'd sigh, which was her way of saying, Jessie is blocking my path to the country club. I was the steady, dependable fallback, which meant I was always the one to clean up the messes. My high school graduation money? Gone to help Tyler pay off a debt from a multi-level marketing scam. The down payment I was saving for a house with Anna? Gone to cover a sudden, mysterious lien on Beatrice's car title. I sacrificed my own upward trajectory for the sake of family peace and keeping up appearances. I remember one specific Christmas. I'd worked 60 hours a week for months just to buy Stan a proper fishing boat he'd always wanted. Tyler showed up late, empty-handed, but announced he was leasing a brand new BMW 7 Series to project success. Beatrice spent the next 2 hours talking about Tyler's vision and barely acknowledged the boat I'd bought Stan. I watched the look on my dad's face, a quiet flicker of pain and disappointment, and I felt the familiar burn of being overlooked. It was this history of financial reliance and emotional dismissal that allowed them to plot so easily in my hospital room. To them, I wasn't Jesse, the son and brother. I was just the unfortunate obstacle standing between them and a $500,000 solution. But the poison wasn't just Tyler's arrogance. The real toxicity came from Beatrice's secret. About a year and a half before I collapsed, Beatrice asked me to come over to fix her settings on her computer. She was frantic, saying she thought she had a virus. I'm a mechanic, not an IT guy, but I went anyway. She sat fidgeting in the kitchen while I worked. When I checked her browser history and temporary files, just the usual routine, I found something that stopped me cold. It wasn't a virus. It was a trail of online poker sites, sports betting forums, and loan shark advertisements. I found bank statements she thought she'd deleted, showing massive, recurrent transfers. Over $80,000, money that should have been Stan's retirement nest egg, had been hemorrhaged chasing losses. She was deep, deep in debt, desperate, and hiding it from everyone, especially Stan. The woman who lectured me on fiscal responsibility was a catastrophic gambler. I felt a wave of nausea. I closed the windows quickly, told her she had some bad cookies, and pretended I hadn't seen anything. Why didn't I confront her? Because confrontation always led to emotional blackmail and more chaos. I was the fixer, not the disruptor. I thought, I'll deal with it later. I'll keep an eye on it. That single choice, my decision to be the quiet observer, the Stan of my generation, was a massive mistake. I left her with her secret, and that secret grew like a tumor. Suddenly, all the pieces of their greed, their panic, and their intense interest in my insurance policy clicked together perfectly. Beatrice needed a sudden, catastrophic influx of cash to cover her colossal debts before Stan found out. Tyler needed a bailout before his financial life imploded publicly. And I, the honest, boring mechanic with a hefty recent life insurance policy, was simply the easiest target. If you're watching this and you're covering for someone's financial addiction, stop. Get out now. Their problem will become your life or death problem. I learned that the hard way. In that paralyzed state, the realization hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. They didn't just want my money. They needed my death to maintain their lie. And I had been watching the root of that poison grow for 35 years, powerless to stop it because I valued peace over truth. I should have paid attention to Stan's silence during those long, strained family dinners. Stan saw everything, but he did nothing. And that inaction, that complicity, nearly cost me my life. That was the real toxic family dynamic that allowed them to believe they could get away with murder. By the time I was 30, I wasn't just the mechanic who ran Hendrix's garage. I was the family's silent, unpaid financial safety net. Every single sacrifice I made, every dollar I poured into stabilizing my own life, was treated by Beatrice and Tyler not as an achievement, but as available collateral for their next disaster. My life was a constant state of exhaustion. I'd be up at 5:30 a.m., coffee brewing, wrench in hand, ready for the day. I loved the smell of oil and steel. It was honest, it was predictable. Unlike my family, I'd taken over the shop from my grandfather, promising myself I'd uphold his honest pricing and quality work. The shop was doing well. I wasn't rich, but I paid my bills. I had health insurance, and I was saving religiously for my daughter Maeve's college fund. But running the business was only half the job. The other half was managing the chaos that constantly bled out of my mother's life. Beatrice's online gambling addiction was becoming impossible to hide. Even from Stan, she'd developed this nervous tic, checking her phone every 15 minutes. Her eyes glazed over like she was watching a slot machine spin in her hand. She started coming to the garage more often, not to see me, but to borrow money from the till, promising to repay it by the end of the week, a promise she never kept. "Jesse, sweetheart, Tyler just needs a small bridge loan for his latest venture." She'd coo, reaching for the deposit envelope while simultaneously checking to see if I'd noticed the tremor in her hand. "Mom, Tyler's ventures are why I don't have a down payment for a decent house." I'd argue, my voice tired, not angry. "Don't be selfish, Jesse. Tyler is chasing millions. You're just working under a hood. If he makes it, we all make it." She'd snap, her eyes suddenly turning cold and hard. The eyes of a predator, not a parent. This constant drain, this emotional blackmail, was the real reason my marriage to Dr. Annabelle fractured. Anna is an emergency room nurse, a beautiful, brilliant woman who sees life and death every single day. She understood stress, but she couldn't understand the relentless, calculated financial terrorism of the Hendricks family. We divorced 2 years prior, not in a fit of rage, but in slow, aching weariness. We sat in the mediator's office, two people who still respected each other, admitting defeat. Anna had begged me years ago to cut them off, especially after I had to sell off a small piece of land inherited from Grandpa, land I intended to build our home on, to pay off a crippling debt Tyler had racked up trying to play the stock market. "Jesse," she had told me, her voice breaking, "I am married to the shop, and you are married to your mother's debt. I can't compete with the family drama. You value their peace over your own sanity." She was right. I was an anti-hero. I should have been the one to enforce the boundaries. But I constantly chose the path of least resistance, the path of sacrifice. I thought that if I kept giving, the problems would stop. They didn't. They just grew stronger, like a tumor feeding on my efforts. Anna kept the house. I moved into a small apartment above the garage, which, honestly, felt like my natural habitat anyway. The only perfect thing that remained was our daughter, Maeve, 8 years old, with Anna's sharp green eyes and my stubborn streak. She was my anchor. Every morning, I'd take her to school, and every Sunday, Anna would drop her off at my place. We had established a truce, Anna and I, built on mutual love for Maeve. The weeks leading up to the heart attack were the most strained yet. Tyler's final big deal had collapsed. He was facing public humiliation, repossession of his leased BMW, and potential lawsuits. He came to me desperate, smelling of desperation and cheap scotch, begging for a huge loan. "Jesse, it's a temporary setback. Just $50K. I need it to stabilize the portfolio. We're talking generational wealth," he pleaded, standing over a transmission I was rebuilding for Mrs. Henderson. I looked up, covered in grease, completely done with his lies. "No, Tyler, I can't. That money is Maeve's college fund. I will not sacrifice my daughter for your ego." The look on his face was terrifying. It wasn't sadness. It was the face of a man who suddenly saw his brother not as family, but as a vault that wouldn't open. The ice I'd seen before returned, harder this time. He left without saying another word. Meanwhile, Beatrice was on a rampage. Stan had finally noticed the large withdrawals from their joint retirement account. The house was tense, filled with hushed, angry arguments. Beatrice needed cash now to cover her losses before Stan filed a police report or, worse, filed for divorce. I was stuck in the middle, trying to run a business and shield Maeve from the rising tide of family poison. I was bone tired, physically and emotionally. Then came the call from a sleazy insurance agent, a guy Tyler knew from his network, pitching me a cheap, high-yield life insurance policy. "Jesse, you're young, you're healthy. 500,000 for pennies a month. It's just responsible parenting," the agent chirped. I'd done it for Maeve. I named her the primary beneficiary, and Stan and Beatrice as the trustees until she turned 18. It was the only time in recent memory I saw genuine warmth in Beatrice's eyes, a warmth that I realize now wasn't love, but calculation. I never knew that simple. Responsible paperwork was signing my own death warrant. That's the kind of background noise I was living with. That's the toxicity that defined my world. But here's the thing. I was physically fit. I ran 3 miles every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I didn't smoke. I barely drank. I was the least likely candidate for a massive heart attack. When I collapsed on the concrete floor of Hendricks's garage that Tuesday morning, I thought it was just karma catching up to me. I thought the stress had finally won. I didn't know I was wrong. I didn't know that my collapse wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of a criminal investigation. I certainly didn't know that the single, crucial clue, the thing that would ultimately save my life and expose them all, was sitting right in the hospital waiting room. The only reason I'm here talking to you today is because of the one person who refused to accept the official story. The one person who knew me better than anyone, and whose years of experience in the emergency room told her, definitively, something is terribly wrong. That person was Dr. Annabelle, my ex-wife, and the most unlikely hero in my story. Stay tuned, because the next chapter is where Anna risks her career to save my life, and where we finally uncover the chilling truth of what they put into my morning coffee. You hear that sound? It's the sound of a garage door rolling up. To me, it used to mean a new day, a new problem to fix. But now, when I hear it, I hear the sound of the trap being set, because everything, all the exhaustion, all the debt, all the silent resentment, it all came to a head 3 days before I woke up paralyzed in the ICU. It was a Monday afternoon, and I was deep under Mrs. Henderson's old Buick, replacing a clutch that was about 60 years past its prime. I was covered in grease and focused. That's when the bell above the office door jingled, and I heard the crisp, expensive click of leather dress shoes on the concrete floor. Tyler. I slid out from under the car, wiping oil onto my jeans. He looked like he'd stepped off a yacht, but his eyes were bloodshot, and his salesman's smile was stretched too tight. He was wearing one of his designer suits, the kind he couldn't afford, and he smelled less like success and more like pure desperation. He skipped the small talk. "Jesse, I need it. Now. $50,000. I didn't even bother arguing. I just walked over to the workbench, grabbed the can of brake cleaner, and started spraying down my hands. "No. Tyler, I told you no last week. That money is for Maeve. It's in a locked account. You already tried to play the stock market with my inheritance. You already nearly bankrupted the family trying to sell swampland in Florida. I'm done being your ATM." His jaw clenched. The transformation was instant and chilling. The charming golden child persona vanished, replaced by something cold and truly ugly. "You think you're better than me because you turn wrenches?" He sneered, the contempt in his voice thick enough to taste. "I'm out here chasing millions. Jesse, generational wealth, and you're protecting a 5-figure account like some kind of saint? You're going to let your own brother fail over a used truck's worth of money?" "I told you," I said, my voice steady, but my gut was twisting. "I won't sacrifice my daughter for your ego. Tyler." That was the line. That was the moment he knew the vault was permanently sealed. He leaned in close, his face red. "Fine. You want to be selfish? You want to be the martyr? You're going to regret this. Jesse, I promise you, you're going to regret not helping your own family." He spun on his heel and clicked his way out of the shop. I stood there, listening to the expensive sound of his car peel out of the parking lot. And for the first time, I felt a genuine flicker of fear. This wasn't just anger. This was the rage of a desperate man who saw his comfortable life dissolving because of me. That evening, I did something I almost never did. I went out for dinner. Anna had Maeve, and I needed to clear my head. I left the shop around 8 p.m. Now, this is the detail that the detectives and I focused on later. This is the inciting incident. Every morning, I start my day the same way. I unlock the shop, I turn on the lights, and I grab my favorite mug. It's a slightly chipped ceramic mug that says "World's Best Dad" in faded letters. Maeve made it for me in 2nd grade. It sits on the edge of the workbench, ready to go. I never wash it in the shop. I just rinse it out and put it back. I left that mug right where it always was, next to the coffee maker in my little office nook. Around 10 p.m., my father, Stan Hendricks, showed up. Stan is a creature of routine. He needed a specialty wrench he kept at the shop for a plumbing job the next day. He parked his worn-out pickup around the back entrance and used his key to slip inside. Stan wasn't alone in the shop. He found Tyler near my office nook. Tyler was nervous, fidgeting, holding something small in his hand. "Stan, bless his heart, chose his lifelong comfort. Silence. He didn't ask questions. He didn't confront. He just muttered, "What are you doing here, son?" Tyler jumped, startled, shoving whatever he was holding into his pocket. "Just checking inventory. Dad, late night at the office." He gave Stan the familiar fake salesman smile. Stan, tired from a long day, just wanted his wrench. But as he walked past the coffee station, he saw something on the counter. A tiny, viscous drop. It was a strange, deep, emerald green color. A color that didn't belong anywhere near coffee. Stan noticed it, looked at the drop, looked at Tyler's nervous smile, and then looked away. He grabbed his wrench and left, saying nothing. He chose to ignore the uncomfortable truth. He chose silence over confrontation. He didn't know then that the tiny drop was ethylene glycol, antifreeze. He didn't know that his silence was the final layer of protection for a would-be murderer. The next morning started like any other. I was the first one there at 6 a.m. The coffee pot gurgled. The air smelled like motor oil and stale grounds. I grabbed my world's best dad mug. The first sip tasted off. Maybe a little bitter, maybe metallic. But shop coffee always tastes metallic. I drank half the cup before the first wave hit me. A crushing, physical pressure. Like someone had welded a 1,000-pound weight onto my chest. Then my left arm went numb. The textbook symptom Anna, the ER nurse, had described 100 times. It's happening. This is it. I stumbled, dropping to my knees on the oil-stained concrete. My phone somehow made it into my hand. I managed to dial 911 before the world went white. Then black. I thought death was the end of the pain. I was wrong. The real pain began when I woke up and realized my own family hadn't just stood by while I suffered. They had manufactured my collapse. I heard Tyler's whisper echoing in the darkness of the ICU. He's going to flatline anyway. I lay there, trapped, waiting for the inevitable. They thought they had won. They thought the poison, the gambling debt, and the endless lies had finally secured them the payout. But there was one thing they didn't count on. The one person who knew me better than my own mother did. The one person who would break every rule in the book to save the father of her child. My ex-wife, Dr. Annabelle. And she was about to blow their entire plot wide open. The beeping was the metronome of my living nightmare. For 3 days, I lay in that ICU bed, trapped in the prison of my own body, listening to my family debate whether the $500,000 payout was worth the risk of a messy funeral. They never left the room. Not really. Beatrice spent hours on her phone, whispering about liquidating assets. Tyler just kept staring at the heart monitor, waiting for the line to go flat. I was fighting pure physiological hell. The paralysis was one thing, but the damage the poison did to my heart was brutal. Every beat felt like a wrench tightening on a faulty engine. My own engine. I focused entirely on two things: Maeve's face and the sound of Tyler's cold whisper. I told myself I would not die until I had seen justice delivered to him and Beatrice. I finally won the war with my body on the third day. I remember the pain as my nerves reconnected. It was searing, electric agony, but I forced my eyelids open. The fluorescent light was blinding, but I locked onto the first thing I saw: Tyler, sitting slumped in a chair, scrolling through his phone, visibly bored. The chaos was instant. Tyler jumped back, dropping his phone, his face draining of blood. It wasn't the look of a worried brother seeing a miracle. It was the look of a gambler who just saw his winning ticket get voided. Beatrice rushed over, but her theatrics were terrible. "Jesse, my baby, thank God!" she cried, clutching my hand while simultaneously scanning the room for Stan, the one person she truly feared. My throat felt like sandpaper, dry and raw from the tubes. I forced the words out, each syllable sharp and clear, cutting through her fake tears. I heard you. All of you." The room went silent. Tyler's jaw tightened. Beatrice's face froze, transforming from theatrical grief to pure, cold fear. My survival, however, didn't end the crisis. The physical recovery was slow and agonizing, but the medical mystery remained. The doctors, influenced by Tyler's early lobbying, were ready to chalk it up to stress and unfortunate genetics. But Annabelle wasn't having it. Anna came in every day, not just as Maeve's mother, but as a seasoned ER professional. She stood by my bedside, holding my hand, her expression grim. "They're wrong, Jesse. They are all wrong." She started tearing into my chart. She looked at the lab work, the EKGs, the cardiac catheterization results. She saw that my arteries were mostly clear. She saw no history of early heart disease. "Men like you," she said, her voice low and fierce, "don't just have random catastrophic cardiac events at 35. You're too healthy. And the way your heart failed, it wasn't the slow blockage of a typical attack. It was sudden, catastrophic, like a switch was thrown." Anna risked her standing with the hospital staff. She went over the attending physician's head, confronting him in his office. "Look, doctor, I know this patient. I know his history. I've seen hundreds of cardiac events. This feels manufactured. You need to run a full toxicology panel. Not the standard 5. Everything. Check for obscure cardiac toxins." She fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. She didn't have to. We were divorced. But she knew the stakes. She knew that my life, and Maeve's future, depended on uncovering the truth. A week later, while I was battling through physical therapy, Anna called. Her voice was flat, professional, masking a clear horror. "Jesse, get back to the hospital now. It's the lab work. They found 2 substances. The first is ethylene glycol, antifreeze. It causes kidney failure, but they likely used a sublethal dose to cause general weakness." I felt the blood drain from my face. Antifreeze. That terrible green drop Stan had seen on the counter. "What's the second?" I whispered. "The second," Anna continued, her voice trembling slightly, "is digtoxin. It's a cardiac glycoside. It hasn't been widely used in decades, but it's a potent, specific heart poison. It disrupts the electrical signals in the heart. The dose was calculated. Jesse, too much. And it would have been instantly obvious. Too little, and it wouldn't have worked. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." My world tilted. It wasn't stress. It wasn't bad luck. It was intentional. Cold-blooded murder orchestrated by someone with access to obscure poisons and a chilling level of calculation. The toxic reveal wasn't just a diagnosis. It was a criminal indictment. I immediately contacted Detective Rita Hawthorne, a tough, no-nonsense woman with tired eyes who specializes in financial crimes. She took one look at the toxicology report and the details of my life insurance policy, and she knew this wasn't a family drama. It was a premeditated plot. Detective Hawthorne reviewed the evidence: Tyler's desperate financial state, Beatrice's massive gambling debts, and the fact that the security cameras at Hendrix's garage had been cut the night before. "It has to be someone who had a key and knew your routine, Mr. Hendrix," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "And your beneficiaries, your mother and brother, fit the profile." I sat there, the shock slowly turning into a cold, focused fury. My pain was no longer just mine. It was now evidence. The sense of utter vulnerability I'd felt trapped in the ICU was replaced by a dangerous clarity. They had tried to take my life for money. Now, I was going to use their greed to take away their freedom. I didn't have proof of who administered the dose, but I knew their motive, and I knew their weakness. They were desperate, and a desperate gambler will always chase the last bet. I told Detective Hawthorne my plan. It was risky, maybe insane, but it was the only way to get a confession. It was time to set a trap. I was ready to sacrifice the $500,000 policy to find out which of my family members was willing to try and kill me again. Detective Hawthorne wasn't thrilled with my plan. "Mr. Hendricks, you want to use yourself as bait? That's reckless. We have circumstantial evidence, motive, and toxicology. We can build a case." "No, Detective," I told her, sitting in her drab office, still weak but fueled by cold, focused rage. "You have motive and toxicology. You don't have the hand that held the vial. And unless you get a confession or an arrest in the act, my mother and brother will hire the best lawyers. And they'll walk. I won't let them. They are gamblers, Detective, and I'm about to call their final bluff." The plan was simple, brutal, and utterly effective. I would eliminate the payoff, forcing the true killer, the most desperate person, to make a move before the money evaporated. I set up a mandatory Sunday dinner at my parents' house. The atmosphere was poisonous. Beatrice kept giving me these sickly sweet hugs, asking if I wanted soup, while Tyler sat across the room, avoiding eye contact, furiously texting. They were desperate to know if I remembered anything other than the general trauma. Then, I delivered the gut punch. I cleared my throat, using the voice I reserve for announcing unexpected transmission failures, calm, firm, and final. I've been doing a lot of thinking since I almost died, about priorities, about life insurance, and about family. They all leaned in. Tyler put his phone face down, a major victory in itself. I called the agent this morning. I continued, watching Beatrice's face closely. "I'm changing the beneficiary on my $500,000 policy, effective tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. The entire sum is going to the American Heart Association. They saved my life. It's only right they get something back." The room detonated. Tyler actually shouted, leaping out of his chair. "What? You can't be serious! What about Maeve?" "Maeve," I said. My gaze locked on him. "We'll be fine. My savings are in a trust fund. Untouched. She doesn't need blood money." Beatrice, the masterful manipulator, didn't scream. She went silent, the color draining from her face until she looked like cheap porcelain. She started crying, but there were no tears. It was dry, forced, hysterical panic. "Jesse, please, this is insane. Think about your family. We need to discuss this rationally." "We are discussing it rationally, Mother," I countered. "The paperwork is signed. The appointment is set for 8 a.m. It's done." My sister, Chloe, who had been quiet, suddenly started sobbing, ugly, gasping sounds. Her debt was clearly worse than I thought. Stan was the only one who didn't react with panic. He sat at the head of the table, his eyes moving between me and the three circling vultures. I saw a flash of understanding and relief in his gaze. He finally knew I was fighting back, and I wasn't fighting fair. That night, Detective Hawthorne's team installed state-of-the-art surveillance equipment at Hendrix's garage. We covered every angle, but most importantly, the coffee station. I showed them where the world's best dad mug usually sat. I stayed in my apartment above the shop, unable to sleep, waiting for the trap to spring. I felt like a bomb disposal expert, knowing the timer was ticking, but unsure who would rush in to cut the wires. It happened at 2:17 a.m. The exterior lights flickered on. I saw the feed on the small monitor Detective Hawthorne had left me. It was Tyler. He looked frantic, sweating even in the cool night air. He used his old spare key, a key I'd forgotten he even had, and slipped inside. He didn't bother looking at cars. He didn't check inventory. He went straight to the coffee nook, pulling out a small, amber-colored vial from his designer jacket pocket. He was pouring it into the coffee filter, stirring the grounds carefully with his finger. The action looked practiced, like he'd done it before, when the shop door exploded open. "Police! Hands where I can see them!" The sheer, overwhelming noise of the arrest was cathartic. Tyler froze, the vial dropping to the concrete floor, shattering the glass. He didn't run. He just stood there, his salesman's confidence completely gone, replaced by the terror of a child caught stealing. I rushed downstairs as the officers cuffed him. Detective Hawthorne walked over to me, her expression grim but satisfied. "We got him, Mr. Hendricks." He was trying to finish the job before 8 a.m. But the real shock came minutes later, when Tyler was being loaded into the cruiser. He suddenly twisted his head back toward the shop, shouting, desperate to share the blame. "It wasn't just me. It was Mom's idea. She researched the drugs. She gave us the money for the antifreeze. You wanted to pay off your bookie, didn't you? Mom, you valued your son's life at $40,000 in gambling debt?" The words hung in the cold night air. The final confession. The truth wasn't just Tyler's greed. It was Beatrice's monstrous, calculated plan. The arrests were swift. Tyler, faced with the video evidence and his own confession, broke down completely. Beatrice and Chloe were taken in hours later. I walked back into my darkened shop. The floor was littered with glass shards and police tape. I picked up the chipped "World's Best Dad" mug from the workbench. The thing that had almost killed me. I looked over at Stan. He had driven down after the commotion, his face etched with more pain than I'd ever seen. He didn't look at Tyler being driven away. He looked at me, and then he looked down at the floor, shaking his head. "Jesse," he finally whispered. His voice cracked and heavy. "I saw the green liquid that night, on the counter. I saw it, and I said nothing. I chose silence over protecting you. My cowardice nearly killed my son." He finally broke his silence, and in that moment, the cycle of the family poison finally started to break. The arrests brought silence, but not immediate peace. The days and weeks that followed were filled with lawyers, police reports, and the chilling realization that my own mother, Beatrice Hendricks, was facing serious jail time for conspiracy to murder. Tyler was facing the harshest sentence, and Chloe was facing legal ruin for her complicity. The family I'd known my entire life shattered like a windshield hit by a stone. The physical recovery from the dig toxin and ethylene glycol was slow, but the emotional recovery was the real marathon. I wasn't just healing my heart, I was learning how to trust the world again. Every sip of coffee, every knock at the door, brought a flash of paranoia. But from that toxic destruction, something unexpected grew. Genuine, honest connection. The day after the sentencing, Tyler got 15 years. Beatrice and Chloe got significant probation and hefty fines. Stan showed up at the garage. He wasn't carrying a suitcase. He was carrying his old plumbing toolbox, the one covered in decades of grease and dust. "I'm moving in," he said simply, setting the box down in the small apartment above the shop. "Dad, you don't have to," I told him. He looked me straight in the eye, and for the first time in my life, his eyes weren't clouded by fear or silence. They were clear, remorseful, and determined. "I do have to. Jesse, I told you, my silence was complicity. I watched the greed consume your mother for 40 years, and I was too afraid to challenge it. I put the pretense of peace above the truth, and it nearly killed you. I won't make that mistake again." He didn't just move in. He became my partner. Stan used his plumbing skills to finally fix the ancient pipes in Hendricks's garage. We worked side by side, not just fixing cars, but repairing the broken trust between a father and son, over takeout food and cold beer at night. He'd tell me stories about my grandfather I'd never heard, stories about honesty, hard work, and what it meant to really own your mistakes. The cycle of silence was finally broken. The court case solidified the chosen family around me. Doctor, Annabelle and I never remarried. We were better as friends, better as co-parents, than we ever were as spouses. But she had saved my life, fighting the entire medical system for me, and she became the true guardian of my well-being. "I knew you, Jesse," she told me one evening, dropping Maeve off. "You're a health nut who runs 3 miles before breakfast. You don't just have a random cardiac event." I knew something was wrong, and I wasn't going to let them bury the truth. Our co-parenting turned into a genuine, functional partnership. We established new traditions: Sunday dinners at my place with Stan cooking his famous chili, Anna bringing dessert, and no discussion of money, debt, or insurance policies. My daughter, Maeve, was the real hero. She processed the terrifying betrayal with a wisdom that shamed all the adults around her. The day after the sentencing, she found me sitting in the quiet garage, staring at the concrete floor where I'd collapsed. She climbed onto my lap and wrapped her thin arms around my neck. "Daddy," she said, her voice small but firm. "Grandma and Uncle Tyler and Aunt Chloe made a bad choice because they forgot something important." "What's that?" "Sweetheart, that people are worth more than paper with numbers on it. You taught me that when you fixed Mrs. Chen's car for free because her husband was sick. You said helping people matters more than money. You remember that?" "I remember everything you teach me, Dad. The important stuff." She reminded me what I was fighting for. My lawyer helped me implement the ultimate boundary in my new estate planning. I kept Maeve as the primary beneficiary, but I added a unique protection, which we called the anti-murder clause. It's simple, and it's brilliant. In the event of my suspicious death, if any relative is found to have benefited from the payout or is implicated in a crime, the entire $500,000 immediately transfers to the American Heart Association until a thorough investigation clears them. It's the ultimate financial deterrent. It ensures that the payout for my death is entirely worthless to anyone with malicious intent. It's not about saving money. It's about saving myself from future greed. The heart attack didn't kill me, but it killed my naive belief that family meant unconditional love. It taught me that sometimes you have to burn the bridge to get rid of the poison. Now, every morning, I watch the sun rise over Hendrix's garage. I sip my coffee from a brand new, clean mug, knowing the only hands that touched it were my own, or Stan's. The scars remain, physically and emotionally, but they remind me that I survived something that was supposed to kill me. The doctors called my survival a miracle. I call it a second chance to build a life surrounded only by those who would save me, not sell me. If you've listened to this story, and you recognize that chilling pattern of toxic loyalty or financial exploitation in your own life, you're not alone. The hardest decision you'll ever make is choosing to protect yourself from your own blood. But it is the most valuable decision you will ever make. Look, I'm just a mechanic. I rebuilt my life from the ground up, fighting off my own mother and brother. I'm sharing these stories, these real, raw, sometimes ugly stories of survival and justice, because I want you to know you can fight back too. So, if this story resonated, if it gave you that surge of focused fury or that sweet feeling of catharsis, you need to do 3 things right now. First, hit that like button, because that sends this story to someone else who needs to hear it. Second, comment truth below and tell me what the most important lesson you learned about separating your relatives from your chosen family was. And most importantly, subscribe to this channel. I'm going to keep bringing you these deep dive, powerful true stories of people fighting back from betrayal, showing you exactly how they found justice, rebuilt their lives, and won their own impossible comebacks. We're building a community here based on strength and honesty, and you don't want to miss what comes next.